Welcome to Act 2 You're On. Join us weekly at our studio roundtable as Rhonda
and Kate invite spectacular guests to weigh in on staying vibrant and healthy.
Launch your next great act with authenticity and purpose.
Summon your courage, superstar, and step into the limelight. So grab a coffee
or a martini
and let's set the stage for a grand entrance. It's Act 2.
You're on. Greetings, friends. I'm Rhonda Garvin-Conaway, and I am joined by my co-host,
Kate Levy, and we are joined by our producer behind the scenes, Kathy Carswell.
We're going to be discussing what we do during transition again today on a common theme and topic, but we're going to be talking about what happens when transition is born from challenging or painful situations. Today, we're going to be talking about domestic violence. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we want to give voice to a subject that is all too often in the shadows. We have an opportunity to honor the survivors and the victims and raise awareness. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence published these statistics. In the United States, more than 10 million adults experience domestic violence annually. In each of these adults experienced only one incidence of violence. An adult in the U.S. would experience violence every 3 seconds. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men experience sexual violence, physical violence, and/or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetime. From 2016 through 2018, the number of intimate partner violence victimizations in the United States increased 42%. Domestic violence is prevalent in every community and affects all people regardless of age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender, race, religion, or nationality. Physical violence is often accompanied by emotionally abusive and controlling behavior as part of a much larger systemic pattern of dominance and control. Domestic violence can result in physical injury, psychological trauma, and even death. At the end of today's episode, we're going to share some resources with our audience so we all know where to go and what to do if faced with domestic violence. We're also going to hear from today's guest about her experience working on the front lines, partnering with survivors of domestic violence. Lynda Monks is a social worker who works with people day in and day out who are affected by domestic violence. She has been a medical advocate at a Level 2 trauma center outside of Philadelphia for the past 20 years. She specializes in working with victims of domestic violence, elder abuse, and human trafficking. Before her work in Pennsylvania, she worked at domestic violence programs in Colorado, California, and Pennsylvania as an advocate, counselor, and community educator. Lynda, we are so grateful to have you in the Act 2 You're On studio. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Lynda, you heard me read those statistics, and I believe that domestic violence affects more people than we probably even know. I imagine that some folks who are listening to today's podcast are thinking domestic violence doesn't affect them. What can you speak to or say about the prevalence of domestic violence and how sadly universal it is?
Well, I think the numbers that you were giving, they're high, they're alarming. Those are only the reported cases, right? So those are the only ones that have either been reported to the police. I know we keep statistics here, so I have a statistic that I can give to my state's coalition on how many patients I saw, but you have to get to the hospital to see me, right? And a lot of people don't do that. I know the hotlines in the counties, they have statistics about how many people have called them. So those are the people that are just reaching out. So for everybody who has told somebody that this has happened, there are, I don't know what the numbers are, but there's a high number of people that are dealing with this who have never told anybody. So I think it's important when we put the numbers out there, it's really important just to remember it's reported cases. It's where somebody says this is happening to me. It also doesn't include emotional abuse, financial abuse, psychological abuse, exploitation, isolation. All of those usually are kind of a precursor to the stuff that I see in the emergency room, right? When I tend to see a patient, and I see about 30 a month, 30 new patients a month is usually kind of my average. I would say about A third of those I see after an assault in the emergency room where they've had to come in for medical care because of what happened to them. The other 2/3 are people who come in for other reasons, right? For surgeries or for, appendicitis or whatever, or a hip replacement. And we'll screen them and they say, yes, this is happening to me. And then I get the consult and I go see them too. Or they go, I'm not sure this is happening to me. I get the consult and I go see them. Or they say, no, this isn't happening to me. But the person who is serving them their lunch notices that the husband or the wife or the partner is really aggressive with them, right? So then I'll get the consult. So my job is to make sure that when somebody leaves the hospital, they have the resources that they need. If they want them, they can tell me, I don't want to talk to you. And that's fine. But at least they know we're going to ask again the next time they're here. And they know they can come back. If you go to any of the bathrooms in our hospital, there's signs everywhere. Take a hotline numbers. It's really important. Numbers are important, but those are just reported cases. Those are just reported cases. And so we got to just make sure that we're always asking the question.
When we think of domestic violence, perhaps we all get a picture that pops into our mind, or there's a profile that we think of. But obviously, this type of violence is happening, and it's not just between spouses. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that idea of this profile, and you can help us unpack what makes a relationship abusive, and if you can speak to that a little bit.
I used to call it, and this is a term I don't like to use, but it's the term that kind of best describes it, is I think we think of, when we think of domestic violence, we think of the Lifetime movie Battered Woman. And I understand why we do that, because that was kind of what we were given for a very long time, that these are just, down and out women who don't have self-esteem and they just need to be saved and all of that. That's not really the case. The case is it crosses every kind of barrier you can imagine: socioeconomic, gender, racial, religious. I can't share it because I don't want to share it, but the spouses of the people that I've seen, or the partners of the people that I've seen, or the ex-partners of the people that I've seen, they're in high-ranking positions, right? And they, it's somebody that you go, I can't believe this. There's no way this person would do this. So we have to kind of get that picture out of our head that this is one type of women. It is women who are abused by men. It is men who are abused by women. It is people in gay relations. It is people in lesbian relationships. It's trans people. It is people who are non-binary. It's relationships with ex-partners. It's relationships with family members. It is not that typical, and I'm putting my quotes up, and it's a term I don't like to use, but it's not the typical battered women. I rarely see somebody who comes in with a black eye, is what I'm saying. There is more nuance to what's happening into this relationship, instead of she's just married to a monster, he's just married to a monster. That's not what this is about. I want to get the words right here. It's very complex, and there is love involved, and there is a relationship involved, and there's family involved. So it's not as black and white as we think it is.
Yeah, that's helpful.
It's very helpful, and I appreciate you providing us with a broader definition and vision and speaking to the complexity, because often growing up, I think I heard people talking about those battered folks and coming up with scenarios about how to solve it and how to fix it. And they sounded like really simple solutions, and it sounded very black and white. And it sounds like this topic is anything but that.
It's about who has the power in the relationship, right? It's not necessarily about who's bigger or who's stronger. It's about who has the power in the relationship. And when you're in a partnership, or, if you're in a family, that power should be fairly equal. Some people, depends on your relationship. There's some people that are better at one thing and better at another thing, and the power kind of goes a little lopsided in certain ways. But if somebody has all the power in the relationship, if somebody has the power to make decisions, to make the financial decisions, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this. Well, he or she was looking through my phone. and blah, 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 blah. And I'm going, what? They were just looking through your phone. It's that power dynamic where I don't even have boundaries, right? I can't even set a boundary with you. You can do whatever you want. You can go through my stuff. You can look through my phone, and that becomes normal, right? And then we go, well, why doesn't he or she just leave? They have no power at that moment. They don't think they do, right? They've been told they don't. They've been treated like they don't. So it's our job, at least it's my job, to make sure that I'm empowering them to make a next move. I don't own a cape. I can't save people. I just don't have the ability. I wish I did. I don't have any superpowers, but I do have the kind of the ability to listen, to hear what they're trying to tell me, and maybe help them figure out a way that they can be safer, or figure out a way to get them to a place where they can feel a little more empowered to make a decision.
So are there ways for us to address domestic violence in a proactive way? What can we do in society to prevent abuse from happening?
There's like the big picture and then the little picture, right? The big picture is, and we do it in the county that I work in, I think you need to teach kids from K to 12 what a healthy relationship is, age appropriately. We always get like elementary schools, like, you want to talk about domestic violence to a bunch of third graders? Well, no, we want to make sure that they know what a healthy relationship is. We want to make sure that they know what autonomy over their body and over their spirit is. We want to make sure that standing up for yourself and, making sure that being liked isn't the most important thing to you. Being able to say no, being able to say, that doesn't feel right. Teaching kids that early sets them up to be more empowered adults and more empowered teenagers. Bigger picture is voting for people who support the Violence Against Women Act, right? Voting for people who support gun control laws. Getting rid of those gun show loopholes. In Pennsylvania, you're not allowed to own a firearm if you have a protection order against you. But that doesn't mean you can't drive to a state that has a gun show loophole and get a gun. You might not be able to get it in Pennsylvania, but you can't get it legally, but that person can get a hand on a gun and come back to Pennsylvania with it. So that's kind of the bigger picture. The smaller things that I think everybody can do is that you find out where your local domestic violence agency is. See what they need, right? See if they need what I always need, and this is just putting it out there, and I'm not speaking for all domestic violence services, but I'm speaking for me, is that especially these days, I always have a gas, like a gas card. So people can put a little gas in their car, a grocery card. So people can go shop for what they want, not for what I think they should get. They should be able to be empowered to shop for their children, for food, any type of gift card. Another thing, and it's so obvious, but nobody ever thinks of it, for the domestic violence shelters, new underwear. They're coming with nothing, right? People donate their old clothes, and people donate blankets and all of that stuff. New underwear, new bras. People come into shelters with nothing. So it's seeing if they know the shelters need formula. It's expensive, right? Because women bring their children into the shelters with them when they're leaving these situations. So I think people want to kind of, I know I used to work in the shelter, so we'd get these giant bags of clothes, which were great, but we didn't have a ton of place to put them. But another option would be, maybe here's a gift card to Walmart for $20, and we can get you there and you can pick out what you need. Empowering people to kind of be able to provide for them, for their kids, for themselves. Yeah. And all those little things you don't think about. You don't think about clean underwear. You don't think about, putting gas in your car. People don't leave because they can't put gas in their car because they have no money, because they have no access to the finances. And if I'm an abuser, I'm going to make sure there isn't gas in your car. I'm going to make sure, and if there is gas in your car, I'm going to know how much there is. And I'm going to know where you went, how many miles you drove.
Those resources are incredibly informative and helpful. I think we can all feel like we can do a little something with that information. For sure, Lynda. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I'm also curious about friends who are listening and they're wondering or suspecting that somebody they know is experiencing abuse. Can you speak to signs that we might be looking for, or how do you approach the situation? And how do you respond if someone they care about is a victim of domestic violence?
This is always the really tricky question, because there is a safety piece in all of this, right? You don't want to put anybody in more danger when you're approaching them. So you have to figure out when you can approach them. Have you guys ever seen the What Would You Do, that show where they have, so there's this incident where they're having a domestic violence situation in a restaurant, right? And there's some great people who jump up and save this person, and it's awesome. It's great that they saw it. It's great that they tried to do something. Where I'm always thinking, if I say something to her in front of him, right, this could put her in more danger. If I say something to him in front of her, he could go back home and she could really, really, do something really dangerous. So it's really important to remember kind of safety. If you are able to talk to this person alone, if you are able to talk to this person safely, then the way I would approach it, and the way that I think is the most appropriate to approach it, is this is what I see. This is what I see. I noticed that you don't come to game night anymore. And when you were there, you were constantly checking your phone to see if he was calling you. Or I noticed that bruise. I noticed that he or she is becoming more possessive, that they need to know where you are at all times, that they need to know who you're with at all times. Are you okay? Are you okay? Right? Then they have the right to say, I don't want to talk about it, or they have the right to say, yes, this is going on, or they have the right to say it's none of your business. But at least they know you're somebody who isn't going to judge them. You're somebody who is looking out for their best interest, and you're somebody that they could probably feel very safe with. If somebody tells you this is happening, if somebody says, okay, you know what, I got to share this with somebody, this is happening. It's so important. Your job is to listen. And the number one job is to believe them, right? To believe them and not say, well, why don't you just leave? And not say, I can't believe Jim's that way. You know what I mean? He's a great guy, so I think it's important to believe them, listen to them where they're at. They don't probably need you to dive in and start working on getting them a train ticket across the country and all that. Right now, it might be they just want to talk about what's happening. And then ultimately, you get them hooked up with the people who know how to kind of get them where they need to go or can keep them safe. And every county, I'm talking about, no, every county, most counties do. Most counties in most states, the smaller counties sometimes will combine. If you lived in Missouri, Domestic Violence Services, Missouri, it'll go to the state coalition, and then it'll take you to the counties. Kind of breaks down that way. So there's always kind of a resource that you can call, and most are 24/7. There's always an advocate on the other end of the line. And if it becomes something where you're like, okay, I'm really worried about this person's safety, it's important to get them hooked up with the right people, because maybe they need to get a protection order. Maybe they do need to make a police report, all of that stuff. And if that happens, then we need to make sure that they're safe after they do that.
And I'm thinking that our first responders on the police departments are well versed in how to communicate if you are concerned about someone, and can partner with you, that it doesn't have to, as you said, look like a Lifetime movie necessarily and go from a quiet situation where all of a sudden there are police involved. It could be more of a process.
Yeah. And I think that state to state, though, states have different laws, right? They have different domestic violence laws. I'm fortunate that I work in Pennsylvania, where we have a really strong coalition. And they worked really hard with getting the laws to really be victim centered, because they understand that if we go nuclear, this could be more dangerous for the victim down the road. Let's figure out a way. Clearly, if somebody came into the emergency room with a gunshot wound, with a stab wound, a penetrating wound, a potentially lethal injury, we are mandated to report that to the police because of the crime. 9 times out of 10, the police are the ones that bring them in. The ambulance is there. It's already been done. A lesser injury, though, in Pennsylvania, which I think is a great law, we are not mandated to report it to the police because ultimately that could put the victim in more danger, right? Because we know if somebody came in and with a broken arm, the person who did that is not going to jail for that. It's simple assault, right? And now it's blown up.
Yes.
So if a police report needs to be made in Pennsylvania, at least, which I think is a great law, is we let them know we're here for you. We'll walk you through the whole process. But we also, in Pennsylvania, it says then there needs to be somebody there to tell them how to stay safe.
That's really helpful insight. And I'm curious to hear your perspective regarding the last few years and this uptick and escalation. We see bad behavior on the rise everywhere. We see it playing across our television screens. We see it internationally. We see it domestically. We see acting out in the grocery store, on the airplanes, in driving patterns. So I'm wondering what the last few years has been like for you on the front line.
It's been, you know what? COVID was a nightmare for people dealing with domestic violence. Let's put it out there. They were more isolated. They weren't able to leave their homes. People were losing jobs. So if you were saving up money to leave eventually and you lost your job, you just took a million steps backwards. You were kind of homebound with a person who was abusing you, where before maybe you had 8 hours where he or she was off to their job, right? So it was really, really horrible. And any services, any support services that you maybe put in place before COVID, I'm not going to feel that safe calling my counselor from home when I know my abuser's in the other room, right? So I had a great setup before COVID because I work in a hospital and my office is in a medical office building. So even if somebody was being followed, even if somebody's location was on their phone, they could say, I'm going to the doctor's. And it would be true because that's where they would show up. Now it is, because of COVID, it's telehealth, it's over the phone, it's over Zoom, and it's not as, at least I've found when it comes to direct services with clients and patients, it's not as effective. There's something to be said about feeling safe in an office with somebody and feeling like, okay, I can breathe. There's something to be said on my end as an advocate to be able to see body language, right? To be able to see how somebody's leaning in or somebody's, how their body is telling me what's really going on. So it's been really difficult. It's been really, really hard on the front lines here at the hospital. And then add COVID to it, right? Mm-hmm. Then add worrying about getting COVID. And what I noticed is, and I'm not sure why, and this is anecdotal evidence, and this is just my experience. I haven't seen the numbers go up, but I've seen the severity of the injuries go up, the severity of the abuse go up. For some reason, we have had kind of this string of strangulations. And I've dealt with shootings more than I've ever dealt with before. So is it directly related to COVID? I don't know, but it's directly related to some really, really bad criminal behavior. And when you see those videos of people being really aggressive on a plane or really aggressive in a store towards somebody who's trying to say, I need you to put on your mask. And you get that kind of somebody coming at you, just my rights, my this, my that. Imagine that in your home. Trying to kind of say something, trying to say I would prefer to do it this way, and having that energy at you. The one place you should feel safe is at home. I didn't appreciate people's behaviors. I think people need to calm down. I think people need to take a breath. I think we're all kind of dealing with the stress of this, and there's no excuse for threatening or violent or aggressive behavior. There's just no excuse for it at all. But the one thing that it did kind of show is that's kind of what victims of domestic violence are feeling like at home. My boundaries are being crossed. They're in my face. They're not listening. Anything I say, they're just going to get more angry or more aggressive. Yeah, that's what it's like sometimes when you're dealing with somebody who's violent or aggressive or verbally, mentally abusive at home.
We're so grateful for the work that you do. And I wonder if you can offer some advice to folks who are like you, who are the folks who are on the front line, the social workers, the healthcare workers, who are attending to the intense situations that your line of work leads to. How do you take care of yourself?
The flip side of my job, I realize when I'm talking about this, I'm like, people are probably going, why does she do this?
No, I think they're grateful.
You know what I mean? But like, why would anybody choose to do this? The flip side is I get to help people create new lives. I get to help people. I get to empower people to make decisions and move forward. And so that's kind of what you hang your hat on when you're having a really crappy day, when you're having a day where you thought you'd heard everything and then something else comes up. So I get to kind of hang my hat on the fact that, okay, and we talked about this earlier, my job isn't to put my cape on and save this person. My job is to be able to say, there are other options. Sometimes they aren't great options, but sometimes they're better than what you got. Kind of working with somebody to get them to the point to be able to say, okay, I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to try to kind of, bringing it back to kind of like your second act. This could be their second act, right? Getting out in the world and learning that they don't deserve this abuse and maybe getting more self-esteem. So that's the great part of my job. How do I take care of myself? And Rhonda can tell you this. I have a bit of a dark sense of humor. I like to laugh. Mm-hmm. I'm a knitter. I'm a gardener. I love true crime podcasts. All of those things kind of feed me. I make sure that I do something that feeds me regularly. And there are times where I don't. And then I have a core group of friends and a really great group of friends that'll say, you know what? Okay, you need to take a break because something's going on here. And it's a serious subject. I work with very serious people. I work in very serious situations. But a great example of maybe not being serious all the time. I had a client that I worked with, this is 10 years ago, and she finally got out. And she went from like a 3-bedroom suburban home in a good school district to a crappy little apartment, not in a great part of town, but she was excited. And we were talking, and she just started talking about wanting to decorate her daughter's room. And the story was when they were living at home with her husband, her daughter always wanted race car sheets, but the husband wouldn't allow it because girls don't have race car sheets. And that's not feminine and all of that stuff. And instead of talking about domestic violence, instead of talking about the cycle of abuse, instead of talking about power and control, what I did is I pulled out of my drawer a Target card and I said, go buy the race car sheets, right? That's more important than anything right now. Like, that's going to make you feel good. That's going to make your daughter feel good. It's going to empower you. It's going to say, you know what? I'm going to be okay. I find that if I can find the humanity in it, is that the right word? The humanity in it, where it's kind of like that moment where it's like, you know what? We don't need to talk about him today. You need to go across the street to Target and buy some race car sheets. So if I can find those little nuggets, those little moments in there, that's kind of what helps me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is a perfect segue, Lynda, into the next piece of our episode. You've offered so much wisdom and a lot of important information for our listeners. Is there something that you rely upon in your work or in your own life, or something you could offer to our listening audience that would help them as they are going into their next great act, or maybe encountering the situation of abuse? I don't know. We call this the Golden Nugget segment. Maybe it's getting sheets, but can you share with us the Golden Nugget for you?
I think the Golden Nugget is learning how to take care of yourself, making sure that you, and it sounds crazy because I spend most of my time trying to help other people, but I think the Golden Nugget that I try to teach my clients and my patients and myself is you got to put yourself first, not selfishly, but being able to say, if I don't take care of myself, I can't take care of everybody else, right? And the analogy I always use is the airplane when the oxygen masks come down, right? You got to put it on yourself before you can help anybody else, or you're going to be in the in the plane going, and everybody else is doing fine. That's the nugget, that whatever you're doing next is self-care. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself while you're doing it. Make sure that you're doing, and I said this earlier, make sure you're doing something that feeds you, either spiritually or creatively or whatever, because there's enough hard stuff out there that we're all going to have to deal with. And we can't rely on other people to give us our nuggets. I don't know how else to put it. You got to kind of give it to yourself. And I think bringing it back to kind of the topic that we were talking about, when it comes to domestic violence, victims of domestic violence, that's taken away from them, right? That's taken away what they need, what feeds them, all of that stuff. And it kind of erases your spirit a little bit. So making sure that you feed it, you give yourself a little time every day to feed it, make sure you're taking care of yourself, no matter what you're doing, or no matter what your next move is, that you have to take care of yourself first.
So helpful, so insightful. As our conversation is coming to a close, I'm wondering if I can just ask, what's next for you, Lynda?
I don't really know. Well, there's some exciting stuff going on at work. We have an excellent forensic nurse examiner program in our ER, which means anybody who comes in, they used to be called SANE nurses. They were the sexual assault nurse examiners, but they broadened their kind of field so it's forensics for domestic violence, for elder abuse, for child abuse, for sexual assault, for human trafficking, for victims of crime, anytime evidence needs to be gathered. And my hospital really is getting behind it, and we're starting kind of a safe center, which means you don't have to come through and be an inpatient. If you don't need the medical care, going through the ER, if you don't need to be seen by a doctor and you just want to come in, you say, you know what, a week ago, this happened to me. I'd like some pictures taken. I'd like to make a report. And then the victim gets to decide kind of what happens with that particular report. It'll be really comprehensive. It's great. Like, I'm already starting to collect pay-as-you-go phones. So if somebody comes in and says, yeah, I have a cell phone, but I'm on his plan and he can tell where I am, then I can say, we've done it before where I'm like, leave that phone here. Here's a phone. They'll think you're here and let's get you somewhere else. So it's kind of getting the clinical, getting the forensic, and then getting the psychosocial all in one place is really exciting. So I'm a part of that. So that's going to be really exciting. We're a teaching hospital, so I'm always training the residents. That's fun. Making sure they know the questions to ask. And it's kind of the same old for me. I love being on the front lines. I've never really aspired to kind of go up administratively or anything like that. I think my wheelhouse is working with victims in a crisis. It's kind of where I thrive. So I think I'm going to stay here for a little while.
We are so grateful to have you doing what you do, being who you are, and for having this conversation. You've made the topic really accessible. You've helped clarify some, I think, misconceptions that exist out in the world, and given us some practical thoughts of actions that we could all take to help others or just help ourselves. So thank you, Lynda, for all of this.
You're welcome. It was great to talk to you guys. I'm glad that this is a subject that we're talking about. It has to happen more.
Yes, absolutely. And I know folks are going to be interested in learning more, or for folks who need to get some support and want to find out about your local resources, the National Hotline for Domestic Violence is thehotline.org. Thehotline.org.
Lynda, thank you again. We'd also love to give our thanks to
Kathy Carswell behind the scenes, making the magic happen.
Yes, so you can hear, see, and well, you can't see very much of us right now, but you can definitely listen to our podcasts, and we couldn't do that without our dear Kathy. So thank you. Thank you to Lynda today, and thank you for everyone who's tuned in. So it's left for me to say, go forth, be brave, live well, and do good, because it's Act 2, you're on.
Act 2 You're On was brought to you by Act 2 Share Our Stage. You can find us at a2yo.com and also on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Please download, listen, and subscribe wherever you find your podcast. You can support us using Patreon or buy us a coffee.
I do like coffee.
No, you don't need any more caffeine, Kate. Buy Us a Coffee is a platform that folks can use to support entrepreneurs and artists like us.
So we can keep providing resources for the doers and dreamers to find connection, purpose, and the skills needed to create a sustainable, fulfilling life to better serve the world. And also, so we can buy more coffee.
Oh, Kate, thanks for listening, everyone.